I'm tired.
Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Late Morning Program with Namras Podcast. I'm going to go ahead and say the #1 Hare Krishna podcast in the world. I'm your host, Namras Das. Today, I welcome Chaitanya Mangala Prabhu to talk about his life, projects, and the overarching theme of building community with Bhakti. Chaitanya Mangala Prabhu, thank you for joining me.
Hare Krishna, Namras Prabhu. Yeah, thank you for inviting me today. I appreciate it. It's an honor.
It's an honor to have you.
I do have to say that intro kills it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate it. I also wanted to say you're such a big supporter of this podcast, and I really appreciate that with your comments and you're sharing it and everything that you tell me, even personally. I really appreciate that coming from you. You're like a Gurukuli. You're like the superhero of the Gurukulis. You know, the grandfather of the Gurukulis, you could say, in the sense of like you're very much a pioneer in helping out the children of Prabhupada disciples and of older devotees. So I really appreciate that. So I want to talk to you a little bit about today, about your life and what gets you up in the morning, what interests you. So let's talk a little bit about your history.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about from the very, very beginning.
Yeah. Before I do that, if I can, I'd like to do, along the line of what you just said, I'd like to do a shameless plug here if I can, and say, that I have been a big fan of the Late Morning Program.
Thank you.
I can't say I've followed it from the beginning. I think I came in around episode 10 is when I first started becoming aware of it. I think it was Jonavi, or whichever episode Jonavi was one of the
that was the beginning
I came in on. So the plug is that Namras Prabhu is he has a ambitious goal of doing 100 or reaching 100, the 100th podcast by the end of this year.
Yes.
And he has a fundraiser that he's going on to raise a nominal amount of money, to help cover some of the costs that he's doing from this amazing podcast. And so my shameless plug is, Namras, if you can put it, in the comments somewhere, that link to that fundraiser.
Sure.
And I want to encourage everybody, send him a little bit of money. Every little bit adds up. He's $3,000 into a $5,000 goal. So, help him raise that last $2,000, and, so we can really see, what would that be, like 50 more episodes this year alone.
Yes.
So please, everybody, give from your heart and
thank you,
and help make this happen.
Appreciate it. I put the link scrolling down below. If you go to that URL, you'll be able to get to my fundraiser.
Awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Prabhu. Really, really appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. So back to you were asking a question.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about from the very beginning. So your parents are devotees.
Correct. Yeah. My parents joined ISKCON, early on. Our family's first contact with ISKCON came in the late 60s, starting in 1969. My mother and father and myself, I was the only child at that point. I have 5 siblings at this point, but back that far back, it was just the 3, me and my parents. That we moved to the West Coast and lived between Los Angeles and San Francisco in 1969. And my family first came in contact in San Francisco with ISKCON, the temple there. It went to the Rath Yatra that was in 1969, got exposed to those kind of things. Also by, lucky happenstance that, it was also a time that Prabhupada was actually there in, visiting the San Francisco temple. So they got to have some experience with him personally, directly, at that, early point in ISKCON's history.
Very nice. Did you get to meet Srila Prabhupada?
Yes, I was physically in the same space with him, a few times, in those early days. The first one, like the one I'm describing, initially the 1969, I was 1 year old, so I have zero direct memory, of any of it. But my mother would share the story with me on occasions. The one story that sticks out, is Prabhupada was in the morning giving a lecture inside the temple, the San Francisco temple. Me being 1 year old and wanting to crawl around and kind of walk around a little and make noise. My mother took me outside, and I was playing outside the temple. Literally outside the front door. And then once Prabhupada was done lecturing and they were going to leave, Prabhupada was going to leave, and the usual crew is following him when he goes.
Yeah.
And as they were walking out the door, I guess I was playing in the pathway between where they were all heading. So some devotee came and picked me up and moved me to the side so that the group could pass through. And I guess I didn't like being just, interrupted like that. So I started making unhappy noises. And so, Prabhupada was walking by, and he stopped the group, looked over, saw me there, protesting, and pointed at me, and then looked at the devotee who'd moved me and asked, was he disturbing you? And then the devotee responded, no, Prabhupada. And so then Prabhupada said, then why did you disturb him?
Wow.
And then proceeded on to, so in some ways kind of setting the tone of, knowing, Prabhupada was, he looked out for all of his different followers, to an extent, when he personally came and interacted with them, and knowing that, hey, wow, someone, and it wasn't a big deal. They moved a kid 3 feet off to the side, but it was enough for him to stop and point it out and say, hey, was that necessary?
Wow. So your parents, or they met Prabhupada and they were in California. So then tell us so do you went to Gurukula after that? I assume.
In the 70s, there were some earlier versions of Gurukula. I don't know, how many people, know that, the famous one, of course, it was the first one formally and officially established. That was Dallas.
Yeah.
Which was in 1973. There were actually two lesser known attempts before that. The first one was 1969 in New Vrindavan. Some of the older Gurukuli, meaning even older than me. I'm in my early 50s at this point.
Wow.
But there are the eldest Gurukulis are 60 years old at this point.
Really?
So yeah, there's a whole crew that's above me in age. They were the 8 and 10 year olds when I was.
Oh, I see. Okay.
You know what I mean? So they were the ones who went to New Vrindavan and that one only lasted a couple years. 69 to maybe 70, 71.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was another concurrently one going on in Henry Street in New York. Mm-hmm. And so I was too young for any of those. It wasn't for me till later. Most of the time, my family's originally from Michigan. So at some point my family moved back from California to Michigan. And that's where, my ISKCON interactions in the 70s are primarily through the Detroit temple and the devotees there. And, I at some point I start having, some memories. There are more pictures in my head than actual, I mean, and I think until you're like 8 or 9, you don't really start having concrete, solid memories, but have pictures in my head of the different temples. I think there was 2 before the current one that's been there for forever at this point, the Fisher Mansion or the Devasadan Mandir. And so I have, picture memory, little video clip memories of some of those other temples, as a younger person. But yeah, Gurukula in Detroit, and it was, I was, there's a group that's younger than me, and there's a group that's older than me. Yeah. And so I'm kind of, there's only, even still to this day, in my generation, there's only about a half a dozen of us who are right in my age category. Mm-hmm. And so in Detroit, in the Detroit Gurukula, I was the only one in my age category. And devotee Gyanagamya and Mahamaya. Okay. They're well-known ISKCON personalities. For a couple of years, that they were my ashram teachers. Oh. And for a couple of those, or for one of those years, I was the only student in that ashram. There was a younger ashram, and there was a whole bunch of them. Yeah. In that age group, but yeah, I was the only one for for at least a year or so. And because of that, the temple president, decided and told my parents that I needed to go somewhere where there was more kids my age. Probably a right thing to say. In that context, I mean, setting aside the whole send your kid halfway around the world on their own, that's a whole other topic that you can set aside that one. But in that context, having your kid be somewhere where there's other kids that are more their age makes some sense.
So were you mostly in Gurukulas where your parents were nearby?
For in the late 70s, yeah, my mother, the Devasadan Mandir, was there and it had its grounds. We lived in devotees lived in the rental houses across the street from the temple. Okay. So I didn't live with my parents, anytime connected with ISKCON. They lived in another house further down, and I lived with the Gyanagamya and Mahamaya,
like the ashram setting.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And in that period, the school consisted of about a half a day of some studies, academic scripture studies, and then the other half of the day, I would walk to a warehouse, big building, and the devotees, that's when they were building and creating the Fate Museum.
Oh, right.
And so I would spend a half a day assisting, Bhardraj at some point, and Gyanagamya was working on it, and Adi Dev and Sheila Ditya, they were working on, so I depending on whatever, I would help. I learned how to do mold making and how to, do rough clay modeling, so that then they would come in and, do the fine tuning and all of that kind of stuff. So
how old were you at that point?
Late 70s, 10.
Okay.
So somewhere around 10ish.
Wow. And then, so how long? So did you leave Detroit at some point?
Yes. As I was saying, the temple president at the time, said, and he essentially laid it out, and said, okay, to my mother, you have 2 options. There's 2, there's 2 strong Gurukula candidates at this point. You can either go, to send them to Vrndavan, India, or New Vrndavan, our choice, but pick one.
Right.
And so, I don't know if by happenstance, but Gyanagamya had taken me. So the first time I ever visited New Vrndavan was for the opening of Prabhupada's palace. So that was September 1979. huge festival, thousands of devotees,
Oh
I
my
mean,
gosh.
big deal. All the, all the ISKCON elites were there, and celebrating this big, moment, big occasion.
Yeah.
So, it just happened to be that, that was like a month or two before they gave my parents, the decision, or the choices. And so, of course, I was like, well, I don't know this one that's all the way over in a, far away country. And I've kind of heard from, through the grapevine, not too sure. But I've been to this other place and it was amazing. There were, and of course, as a kid, you don't go, there's a difference between what, it's like on a day-to-day basis versus probably the biggest festival that New Vrndavan community had to date, So,
Yeah,
but in my head, you're like, oh, if I was like that every day, heck yeah, I'll go there. So, my parents, gave me, let me make the choice. And so I picked there. So spring of 1980, my sister Makara and myself, she's my younger. I have 5 siblings,
right.
So she's the next one down from in age from me. We got a ride with a devotee couple from Detroit to New Vrindavan. And they, and they delivered us, to the New Vrndavan Gurukula. So, to answer your question earlier, my parents weren't there when I first started going to that school. Within that year, my mother moved all of my siblings to New Vrindavan, but initially, for at least the first 6 months, it was only my sister and I who were there on our own.
Wow. Okay. So that's 1980. So, gosh, that's like the height of the zonal acharya time.
Oh yeah, definitely. And Kirtanananda was certainly, at that point, one the peak of the zone, the zonal.
Yeah.
So yeah, and there was, at that time there was, a lot of pressure for the kids in the Gurukula to pick a guru, and to get initiated.
Really?
And I guess I have to clarify. It generally wasn't you got to pick your guru because it was the zonal time. So it was kind of like you defaulted with, whichever, we call it, guru musical chairs, and wherever you ended up sitting. That's the one that you got picked for you.
Right.
So so that same year, I got first initiation, Harinam initiation from through Kirtanananda. I watched the earlier episode that you had with Prabhupada. Who I only know, he's a bit older than I am, so I only know him, peripherally. He had left the Vrndavan Gurukula, which we can get to in a few minutes here, a year before I got there. So I've never actually spent time knowing, meeting him and knowing him. But him and that age group that's just a few years older than me, in the 76 and 77, the Gurukula leadership made the decision. Prabhupada's looks like he's not going to be here much longer. So all of these ones who are 10, 11, 12, somewhere a little bit older, let's line them up and get them all initiated. From Srila Prabhupada. So I have a number of older ashram brothers. Especially, I don't know if there's any ashram sisters who got the same initiation thing, but so there's a couple dozen of my older ashram brothers who were directly initiated by Prabhupada. And then those of us who were just that little bit younger, missed that boat, and then we're sailing on the next boat.
Right. So you were in New Vrindavan, and then you said Vrindavan. Did you go?
Yeah. So I was in New Vrindavan for most of that decade. For the 80s, I was New Vrindavan except for 1 year, which would be 1984. And I went to the Vrndavan Gurukula for that year. A whole contingency of myself and I don't know, 30 maybe, so round numbers, 36 of my new Vrndavan Gurukula peers got on a plane and went over to the Vrndavan Gurukula. And some of that same crew spent 2 years. So they were there. I was only there in 84 and didn't go back. But a lot of that same group went back a second year. So they were in Vrndavan for 2 years.
Wow. And at the point from when you just started, when your parents started associating with devotees till you went to Vrndavan, what was the Gurukul experience like? Like, did it start to get kind of strange or like that?
Yeah. It was, it got progressively worse over time, right. until the mid to late 80s, depending where you were. Right. And ISKCON itself went through a at least partial collapse.
Right.
And part of that collapse, was the Gurukul system as it was known to that point. But yeah, as time went on, it ratcheted up, the intensity, the unpleasant, abusive, neglectful, experience was there. Yeah, pretty early on, pretty much from the start. It was consistent all the way through, but there were periods, and probably, the early to mid 80s was the peak of where it got, its worst points.
I want to touch on this later, but I also want to kind of touch on it now, that I find it fascinating that you, being such an older Gurukuli, still associate with ISKCON and are still affiliated with ISKCON, even though your peers, most of your peers, don't, for their, for good reason of all the, stuff that happened. Right. Talk to us a little bit about your thought process regarding that and how you process it. Sure. I did want to go into it later, but I think now is a good time, actually.
It's a great question, and and I think there was a progression in life. That'll probably be the part you're talking about, where we'll keep going on about this as we go through my sharing of my history. Yeah. But I do want to, say in a very, straightforward way, that I'm only talking about myself. I'm only representing myself. I have a place in, the Gurukuli pantheon, if you want to call it that. Yeah. And but I don't speak for the vast majority of my peers, who, as you said, understandably, and I completely respect and appreciate their choices for how they chose to, their life path, to manage some of the, those very negative early experiences. And we'll say, in some round number statistic ways, that the, round numbers, there was about 1,000 people, who would be, considered, part of my, my generation, if you will. Right. And of those, we can count probably 1.5 to 2 dozen max who still have some active participation in ISKCON institutionally. And so it is a very heavy, very intense and and sad piece of a dark spot on ISKCON history. Yeah. And in no way sharing my my choices and my trajectory is making light on that, and in trying to at all invalidate others who the vast majority who chose differently.
Of course, yeah, you can only speak from your own experience.
Yeah. So the question again was?
The question was, how do you still affiliate yourself when there was so much pain and hardship in this society? Like you said, it's hard to even think. I can't even imagine, what that's like. I mean, I have two young children and everything like that. So talk us a little bit about your thought process on why you still affiliate yourself.
Right. And I would say that's, it was an evolution. It isn't and wasn't always like that. And I do have some, long-term boundaries that I don't cross, for, it may be some residual from childhood, and it may not even be relevant today, but it affected me enough so that, I don't cross certain lines. And,
right.
but yeah, it wasn't, I just kept, being involved in nonstop.
Yeah.
As the 80s progressed and, got older and became, turned 18 eventually, as a minor, you're kind of just stuck wherever, wherever life has you and wherever, your family or your situation is and the adults around you. But so by around the time 18 to 19, I figured out that I could pack my stuff and move on my way.
Yeah.
And for a good amount of time, I completely disassociated myself pretty much from ISKCON, my peers. Not my family. My family, my immediate family. I moved from New Vrndavan back to Michigan,
Right.
And then I would say in a big part, the conscious decision, to cut myself off. So given a little context, so around 86, 87, that's when, give or take where where in ISKCON, but those were the collapse years, if you will.
Right.
And that's when the ashram Gurukula, as it was known to that point, fell apart. And I don't think it's ever really, nobody's really tried to revive it since. And so, when that happened, so I, in New Vrndavan, I can speak specifically about, being there. The choice at that point was to send all of the students or the vast majority of them to public school. So there was a point when 100+ kids suddenly were thrust upon the local school system.
Really? Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I'm sure depending on the age of the people, some people started kindergarten that year. But I, being one of the older ones, I was 18 years. I turned 18 that summer. Went to the school office and started, doing at high school down in Moundsville, John Marshall High School. Went into the admissions office, started going through the process. I actually went to 2 weeks of high school because it took us about that long to figure out. Going into the guidance counselor's office, and she said that because you have no academic record, you're going to have to earn all of your high school credits.
Oh my gosh.
And and so and so I was like, yeah. And so I said, what does that mean? And she said, well, so you're basically gonna have to go to high school for 4 years, and you'll graduate when you're 22.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and I absorbed it for maybe a day or something, and then went back and said, okay, what are my options? Because I'm not, that's nuts. I'm not going to stay in high school till I'm 22. And so she said, well, your other alternative is, you've just turned 18, so you're now eligible for your GED.
Right.
Go study for that, pass that, and then you can, apply to, community colleges and start that, that next level of studying. And so I thought, that sounds good. Let me think about that. Went back to, to New Vrndavan, or I mean, not back to, but in the New Vrndavan community, started sharing that and got no support whatsoever. I mean, they were sending the other kids to school because it was legally required, and and because people would go to jail if if you didn't. Kids don't go to school, parents go to jail. So they were doing that because of legal requirements. I didn't have that legal requirement. So there was, they were literally saying, no, you're done. Don't go to any school. Prabhupada said it's like a slaughterhouse, et cetera, mundane education. You're going to waste your life. And so, but, I knew that I wanted, I don't know if I needed it, but I wanted that higher education. So in order to be able to pursue that, I moved away, cut myself off, because the negative comments that kept coming were just enough to sink an already struggling situation. Right. I'm going to get a GED, for God's sake. You know what I mean? That in mainstream education, that's the low rung on the totem pole. You're like, man, you're barely scraping in, and I'm struggling to do that, and they're discouraging me from doing that. So so there was a point in the late 80s, for several years where I just completely cut myself off, focused on those things. When moved back to Michigan, and did some first my GED, and then spent a few years in community college, then eventually transferred over to a 4-year institution, and and got my undergraduate degree.
Nice. In what did you study?
Business.
Very nice.
Yeah, I knew from backtracking a little bit more. I knew from very early on, so some of the the nice things, the positive aspects, of the unique upbringing that we got.
Yeah.
It was that we were doing half-day vocational activities, which quickly turned into all-day vocational activities. By the time I was 14 or 15, there was no more school. It was just going and doing whatever full-time service. But it exposed me to many different work, or vocations, if you will. I got to drive bulldozers at 12. Wow. I mean, full on big monster bulldozer moving earth back and forth. At kids are playing in the sandbox, right? Right. with tractors and dozers. I was driving them, as a kid. And so worked my way through. I worked in the mold shop for a while and learned how to do some arts and crafts, and and how to make molds to replicate. I worked in the wood shop for a while. I worked in, just go down the list. And at some point, it was usually I would come back to it, and it would be the winter, because you don't want to be outside working, when it's middle of West Virginia winters. So in the winter, I would work in the accounting office, and and started off super simple. My first service, I had a little safety box with some cash in it, and my job was to disperse the petty cash to all the devotees who were going and buying things from the store, or getting gas receipt. That was my job. Wow. was just to track the few $100s a day that that was being dispersed back and forth. And so that initial exposure led long term to at this point I'm now a CFO. A VP of finance is my official title at this point, of an international company that does $100 million a year. Wow. So that seed planted back when I was 12, I don't know if I ever would have chosen this path if I didn't get that unique experience of trying on a dozen different occupations, and then right. Eventually going, that one has some interest to me. So by the time I went to college, I knew which one I liked. So so my college path, at least my majors, were pretty clear and decisive. I knew what I wanted from them.
So now throughout college, you weren't affiliated with devotees, like you didn't want to be.
Right.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And it was, a self-reflection time.
Right.
Just trying to figure out, at that point, and there's also just in regular life, you're transitioning from being a kid, and people were telling you what to do to, now I'm an adult and what the hell do I want to do? So it was a combination of both of those things, not, trying to separate myself from some of the negativities of the past, as well as just figure out, okay, who am I and who do I want to be, from here on out. So if I'd say at least about 3 years, I had almost nothing to do. I would keep kind of, in touch with some of my peers, a select number of my peers, but for the most part, that it was, no connection with devotees. And it's one of those, I lived, the camp in Ann Arbor, on the University of Michigan campus.
Right.
I worked. I was going to a community college in the shadow of U of M. I wasn't going to U of M. I wish I did, but but I was going, to the nearby community college, dreaming of getting into U of M later. So there were devotees who would come and then Union Square regularly put up tables, chant, and so throughout, there was a struggle inside myself, because you'd be in, none of my, I was living with roommates, and I'm just this college guy, and we're all just, college students doing college student stuff, and none of them had any clue, as far as they knew. My story was I made it as boring. I pick some vague town that they didn't know, and that's where I was from, and and just kept it boring, so nobody asked me about my history.
Right.
But during those 3 years, I'd be in class, and this was definitely, this was the height of ISKCON in the news, controversial, craziness. What the hell is that cult doing stuff, right?
Right.
So pretty regularly, professors would be like, philosophy, and at some point they go, oh, and hopefully those nutty Krishnas aren't the right ones, and just be like, oh man, you have no clue. In some way you just offended me,
Right?
But I'm not even going to tell you that you offended me. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I just sat there, silently, and my roommates, we'd be walking around campus, and and we'd see the devotees chanting in the distance. And my roommates would be like, oh, those freaking bedsheet weirdo, whatever, and I just kind of, and not say anything, and then, just at some point, I don't know what it was, but something built up inside me, and I remembered, we were sitting out, it was a spring day, we were sitting out in that open area, and my friends were bagging on the devotees. And I just, and so I just, for some reason, I decided, I stood up, walked over to the devotees, and, I remember what it was. The devotee who was playing the drum, it was terrible. Yeah, he was just butchering, the mridanga, right? and I think that's what finally drove me nuts enough to do something. Walked over, looked at him and said, hey, can I play that? And the devotee, of course, he's like, well, it might seem simple, but this is, an ancient, instrument that's very intricate, doing, some.
He doesn't know. He doesn't know that you're a devotee.
Yeah, there's no way. I'm just a college student, random
just a college student. That's so funny.
And so I just look at him and I go, Hare Krishna Prabhu, Hare Bol, my name is Chaitanya Mangala, da 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 da. Can I please play the drum? And and so he hands it over, and so then I just start playing the drum, and I look over at my friends that are sitting, on the grass a little ways away. The devotees, they're all, some random dude just shows up, and starts, and now they're playing the drum well. So they're all just rip roaring, jumping up and down like, oh my gosh, this is, Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, come alive,
Wow.
But that was, a turning point where I said, let me start, figuring out how to reintegrate, two pieces of my life. And after that, I had plenty of explaining to do to my roommates. Who, we went home that afternoon and they were like, what the hell? So then I had to start, giving a little more background, a little more content, and to be honest, and the information spread around my social group. And that day I probably lost half of those people, because I was pretending to be, I was projecting something else. They had no idea, and once they figured out, oh my gosh, this guy, he's, so yeah, I'd say half of the people disappeared that day, and the other half, were, interested in my core group. They were like, wow, dude, if you had told us up front, we never would have let you moved in here. If you had told us up front, you were one of those wacky, cult people. But now that we know you, now we got to think differently about you, and differently about the wacky cult people,
Very interesting.
So, so that was, but that was the start of the kind of the reintroducing myself back in, to involvement with ISKCON related stuff.
Wow. What a story to go back and the mridanga actually kind of brought you back because you didn't like the way that person was playing, and amazing. So at this point you then you left college, and then how did you sort of start more integrating yourself? Like, what did that look like?
Around that same time was when, some of my peers on the West Coast had organized the very first Gurukuli reunion.
I see.
Which was, 88. I think, I'm not sure exactly the year, but it's 88, 89, something like that. And there was no internet, there was no social media, there was, it was old school pen and paper letters and phone calls that cost $1 a minute, in those days. So, so conversations were short and brief, but we still had our phone tree or whatever you want to call it, and grapevine, and, and word got around. So I bought a plane ticket that, it's the summer, so, school's out. So let me go, go see what's happening. Went there. I think the first year there was, I don't know, 3 dozen, it wasn't a huge crowd, a few dozen, Gurukulis showed up, and it was, it was scheduled the day before Venice. Acharyas in am I freezing?
Yeah, you're freezing up a little.
Oh, are we back?
Yes, I think. Yep, there we go. We're back. You're back.
Okay, yeah, I guess it was freezing for a second there.
Yeah.
So So the Venice Beach Rath Yatra, which is one of the biggest Rath Yatras in North America, anyways. So it was scheduled around that time. So we all got together. Started talking to each other. Started realizing that independently we were all going through a very similar experience.
Right.
Processing our past. Of figuring out what that meant to us. And then figuring out, our forward path in life. And so that initial gathering, I think 2 years later, inspired me enough that, finishing off with school, packed my bags, drove across the country, to move to Los Angeles and to be part of the group, a small group who was trying to, and then the theme, we're getting to the theme of today's show, starting to build community. Yeah, it seems to be freezing a little bit for me. Is it freezing for you?
No, I can see you and hear you fine. Am I freezing?
Yeah, just a little bit. So okay, as long as it's not cutting out for you, then it's fine. I'll keep going.
We're good. We're good.
Okay. So yeah, moving to Los Angeles. This is early '90s, probably 1990 actually. And moving and then starting, the early days of trying to build some community, around, my peers and, the people that, that I grew up with, essentially,
Why did you think it was important to build community among the peers? Like, was it just a social thing? Because I remember when I was a kid, it was like the rumors were that it was just like this social thing, and for Gurukulis just hang out. But was the vision a little bit more than that?
Yeah, I would say that there was a little more depth to it than that. But in some ways, I mean that is even when you talk scripturally, nectar of instruction, my favorite go to, if I was on a desert island book, right? What pretty Lakshanam, what are the things that devotees engage in? Ultimately it's share some food and talk to each other, in confidence, share something and hear something in confidence, so, out of the, some scriptural context, that's what it's socializing, what I mean?
Right.
Even in the purport to that verse, Prabhupada says, even in the ordinary carrying out of regular business activities, this is what, business people do with each other.
Right. I remember that. Yes.
So yeah, the description isn't wrong, what I mean? It is right. It was people getting together and associating and talking about things that were relevant and, and important to them and to us in our lives.
Yeah.
Was it social, what was it, it's, it's an evolutionary thing, and in some way, what do when, 18 to 20, early 20-year-olds get together, what they do to entertain themselves is going to be different than what I would do today, right. With the peers that if we got together, we'd be talking about our kids and, our jobs and, you know what I mean? So it's different stages, different relevant talks and relevant activities.
So that do you think that like springboarded you into just like fully like, okay, I can identify back to being a devotee again?
It was certainly, putting me back, in that sphere. I think, like I said earlier, there's certainly, I have, because I'm a product of that era, and I have two distinct personas, if you will. I have Chaitanya Mangala, who is, an active ISKCON, or a participant in ISKCON activities. Yeah. And I have my, my legal persona, and I go do business. And again, because I'm a product of that era, it's probably not even relevant anymore. It's been so long that, that people, these days people are like, who the Hari who's,
Right.
So it's all probably, but because I'm a product of that era, I keep the two distinct, and I navigate in both worlds, and I've been doing it long enough that I function in both of them, well enough.
I'm the same way. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And just, when I'm, I manage $10 million of somebody else's money on a monthly basis,
Wow.
they don't want to hear, oh yeah, hey, did you hear that guy over there is, part of a crazy cult? So,
Right.
And part of that may be my own hang up. I'm not saying that that's true even, but
Right.
that, based on my experience, my perception, my life trajectory, I've kept that. I sometimes jokingly liken it to the different eras for homosexual people, for gay people. You watch Brokeback Mountain from the 60s or whatever era that was in, right?
Yeah.
And they could not do what people can do today. They had to, that whole drama in that movie is about, two guys who loved each other, but couldn't even, it was such a rough time. They couldn't even admit it to themselves. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, likening it to that, the era that I grew up in, you didn't walk around wearing it, proudly, displaying it to everybody. I think nowadays you probably can, and it's a lot easier, but, so liking it, to gay people today can be a lot more loud and proud and, and who they are. And it's great that the world's evolved to that point.
Yeah.
But someone who grew up and lived in a different era is not going to, generally jump on that band. They'd be like, no, that wasn't how it happened in my day,
Right. I mean, that's really interesting. I feel I do the same thing in that I don't involve my legal name or my occupation any to do with devotee stuff at all. Like this podcast, like none of my coworkers, I hope, don't like watch it or anything, because not that I hope, but it's like too many questions come up, and I have a reputation to preserve in my job that, like, okay, I just want to be a normal person, and I just want to work and make money. Like, that's what I'm trying to do. And I don't want anything else to get in the middle of that. So I totally understand what you're saying when you say, to keep those things separate. I mean, you're much higher in the sense of CFO and multi-million dollars managing and things like that. So yeah, I totally understand that. I think other people, I've heard a lot of other devotees feel like that as well. So what I wanted to ask you was, so now that you started doing at this point in your life, you were doing the the reunions and everything like that. And then, so how did that develop into building community with like Kuli Mela, the Kuli Mela? Is it a what would you call it? Like a company, not a company, but a foundation or something like that?
Yeah, Kulimela Association is actually,
right.
it's an incorporated nonprofit, so it actually legally exists,
Wow.
and
Okay.
and there's all kinds of nonprofit benefits that go along with with having something, benefits and responsibilities that go along with having something structured that way. But so the evolution that you're asking about, so in the 90s, they myself and a number of other peers, were organizing these Gurukuli or Kuli reunions, right?
Yeah.
And I was involved with that for about 10 years. I think the last Gurukuli reunion that I was involved in helping to organize was 1990. And by that point, 10 years had gone by, I had, aged, I had evolved in my, my life and, my trajectory, and things that were important to me. And the structure and the reasons for organizing reunions had diminished for me, because it's a lot of work, to organize, these, weekend retreats. It takes, one of those reunions would take, 6 months, to plan and prepare for, and, to bring in, 300 or 400 of your peers. So part of it, tired from doing it so many years, but it was also, it was kind of like okay, I've done that for this long. I'm not sure I want to keep doing this, with this flavor and this style more. So I took, stopped, and took a break from it. And wasn't sure for a few years what was next. So that was, the last one that I organized was the year 2000. It also coincided with that's when I went to graduate school.
Okay.
So from 2000 to 2002, I here in Los Angeles, went to Loyola Marymount University and got my MBA there.
Very nice.
Yes, so that that's what got me to the CFO levels and things like that. I never would have got there without that.
Wow.
Took a few years off, focused on my education and my career and my family. And then, wasn't sure, what's next. But then, another, an age group, younger than me, just, slightly younger than me, started organizing something, and I don't even think they had the name at that point, but it ended up being that first, the product of what they were talking about and working through for a couple of years. That ended up being the new Vrndavan Kuli Mela in 2006.
Oh yeah, I went to that.
You did? Awesome.
Yeah. My brother-in-law, Venkata, we went together.
Awesome.
We went together.
Yeah. I really appreciate when you've had him on a couple times now.
Yes.
I like the conversations you guys have.
Thank you.
So the result of that, was that first Kuli Mela festival. Which and as I was listening and hearing, I was like, okay, here's a next evolution. It may not be the final evolution. Things need always need to adjust. Next generations, you have their own iterations of things, and so. But I was like, okay, this is the next iteration that and I see the value in what they're trying to do, and I can invest some of my time in that.
Right. I remember I think you were on a panel, and you were one of the main members there of like the older generation. That was a very good Kuli Mela in the sense of like, I remember like going to a few like seminars about like, okay, if you want to join the army, there's a Gurukuli who, like two of them, who was in the army, go check it out. Or you want to do something else, like even like kind of like very secular, like vocational kind of things, like seminars there. That was really fascinating, and I really appreciated that about that. Trying to as a community help people to move forward even in their material situations.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that was the I think the spark and the transition that inspired me, and motivated me to re-involve myself in some of these things, and my part in that festival, I was the one who said, what are we doing for the next generation? Me, and in that context, meaning my kids. What are we doing, for our kids? What are we doing for them? There was, to that point, there wasn't a whole lot going on. You go to most ISKCON festivals, there really wasn't, much kid stuff, kid focused things going on. So, I asked that, and how I got involved, I asked that of the initial group, and they were like, well, dude, I don't know. What do you, and I went, oh, okay, good answer.
Yeah.
And so
That's that's a really good concern to have, because you want to have, as a parent, you want to have your children's situation be much better than yours. And so I think that's something that we definitely need to focus on in ISKCON right now, that what are we doing for the next generation? And there's a lot of things that are going on, but in your story, that's a good, I guess, a turning point in the Kulimela Association development of that you wanted to see how we can help the next generation. So then what happened after that? Like, so what year was this now? This was after 2006.
So 2006, that was the initial one. And, there was a lot of interest and enthusiasm, and over the next few years, I mean, the next year, there was one in Alachua. The year after that, there was one in Radhadesh. The year after that, so there was a 5 or 6 year period where every year another hot spot, around the globe, people got inspired to hold, use the concepts and the structure that was formulated, in that initial one, and use that to organize things. I mean, it became a global phenomenon in a way. I mean, relative, ISKCON global. You know what I mean?
Yes.
We didn't have tens of thousands of people showing up. You had hundreds. 500 to 1,000 people showing up. So ISKCON relative global phenomenon. You know what I mean?
Right.
Showing up and participating in these things, and that in its way, started building, elements of community, where there may not have been as much before that.
Right.
And as we started working on these things, and we started, figuring out, that it takes about a year and a half to plan, organize, and then, put on one of these events. And, and through that, those local young people, they get together and, and have to, they're working together. And then, up till now, every Kuli Mela has been held on a, ISKCON property. So then the organizers now have to work together with the local ISKCON group, and they have to hammer out all of their, this is allowed, but that's not allowed, and you can do it at this time, and you can do this over there, but not here, all of those logistical things. People have to learn how to work together and cooperate with each other, so simultaneously the young people are self-identifying themselves, as are they able to to take on some leadership roles, and put together these events, and simultaneously they're learning and how to work together, and work through all the kinks and the misunderstandings and the all of that stuff with the local ISKCON management and leadership, and and most of the times, by the time the festival actually happened, the both the organizers and the local ISKCON were happy, with the results, and elements of the festival, or even the relationships that were developed continued onward after, because the festivals, it's actually only like 4 days long or something, but those relationships that were developed in that year and a half process many times continued on afterwards, and they would do more things in their community year after year.
Very nice. That's a really fascinating thing to know. I did not know that it took so much time and energy to actually put the Kuli Mela together. I mean, I just went and it was just like a very nice festival. So then you could say, for fast forwarding from then on, when did you start to work into other projects, such as talk a little bit about this New Vrndavan Eco project?
Okay, so as we've been discussing previously, I at this point I now have more than a 40-year connection, relationship, history, with New Vrindavan devotees, that the residents that that are live in New Vrindavan, and again, only speaking for myself, and not at all reflecting on other peers who chose different paths, and and how they manage themselves and their relationships. I very early on, I identified myself, as an activist. I mean, and I think that's why people who pay attention and know that if I what my name out there is known, in some ways, from those activist activities that I do. So with New Vrindavan, and ISKCON, more broadly, I've spent, a number of years proactively, proactively lobbying, working against sometimes, the establishment, the leadership, the leaders, trying to improve things, in the institutional ISKCON context. Some things, I feel like I've been successful in nudging, the ball forward in some areas. Some areas you feel like, it didn't, hasn't changed a bit, but me personally deciding to, to whatever extent I've voluntarily chosen to keep pushing those edges, when and where I feel it appropriate. So more recently, over the last decade, in back to your question of New Vrindavan, I was invited by there's two main institutional corporations in New Vrindavan. One being ISKCON New Vrindavan, and that's the one that most people know and are aware of. And then there's a secondary one called ECO-Vrindaban, which is simply put, it's the cows and gardens and the devotees who care for both of those things aspect of New Vrindavan, and the and Prabhupada's instructions and wishes and intentions for New Vrindavan to be a place where that was a priority. So over the years, ECO-Vrindaban, it's a smaller nonprofit that was formed, by some devotees. It was legally formed back in the late 90s, and a lot of the properties and the cows and the garden spaces were all the ownership of those things were transferred into this ECO-Vrindavan, and that group gets to focus and manage on that aspect of the overall New Vrindavan project. So I was invited to be on their board of directors, starting in 2010. And at that point, and I don't know if I can say this for all of ISKCON, but I'd say most of ISKCON North America, certainly both organizations in New Vrindavan, at that point I was the first and only next gen who held one of those legal directorship positions. With that kind of worked, figured out how to work in that space with the pioneer devotees, and then gradually over the next few years, I was then invited to also simultaneously be on the ISKCON New Vrindavan board. So I was on two boards, and just so everybody, these are volunteer, unpaid positions. There's no remuneration. All you get is travel expenses. And there's no, it's total service, devotional if you make it. And so part of my long term efforts are to and at this point, now that I'm in my mid 50s, earlier it was to try to open up avenues for more next generations to have leadership opportunities in an ISKCON context. And I remember, I think you Janavi and Jai Jagannath.
Yeah. That's like a cool episode.
You guys had a really good episode on that. And it was good for me to hear. Okay, a few years down, from me in age from me. How oh, wow, there's still experience. I would have hoped that it'd be a little more, a little more wiggle room in there, but still struggling with that. But so in the New Vrindavan 2 legal entity context, I over the course of several years helped that group of pioneer generation devotees be more comfortable, seeing that that I was responsible and wasn't gonna ruin everything and throw out Prabhupada, whatever fear, and I'm projecting there, but whatever fears and concerns they had, I was able to address them, make them feel comfortable, like, wow, it's actually great that he's here and he's helping, and in some way I liken it to I came in through the back door, through the little entity initiative that cows and gardens, I mean, it's a major important instruction from Srila Prabhupada, but in a lot of it's kind of boring, it's kind of little entity.
I want to touch on
the back door that way. Go ahead.
Sure. I want to touch on that a little bit in the sense of, okay, we have Prabhupada's instruction on how we should, work the land and protect cows and all that. But then there's also the instruction of, okay, we need to expand and we need to preach and we need to, go to the cities and attack Maya with that. So how do you, in your opinion, being someone who is an activist for this ECO-Vrindaban project, how would you say we can balance those two things? Like, some devotees really are pushing, like, you guys are all doing it wrong, we need to protect cows, we need to live off the land, we need to be off the grid, etc. And some other side of the spectrum is, okay, we need to spread this movement for the conditioned souls who are really suffering in the cities and really maybe those two things are not mutually exclusive, but like, what's your take on that?
I think you hit exactly what I'm going to say, is that it's not either or, it's both. It's true. Yes and yes.
Right.
Prabhupada wanted both. And can the same person do both? Probably not, or at least not well.
That's the key, I think.
And so and based on your nature, based on your attraction to how you feel called to serve, you're going to find there's a vast spectrum of opportunities, and you pick your lane, or multiple lanes even. I mean, I'm sharing, I have 2 or 3 projects going on that I'm involved in. So you pick your lanes and and do the best you can in them, and appreciate other lanes, and as much as you can, not denigrate the other lane to elevate yours.
Right. That's the key, I think, also, for sure. I want to talk a little bit about so then now more recently, what have you been working on, like in the past 2 or 3 years?
Over the last 5 years, the Kuli Mela thing, it's always a back burner project. I wanted many of another aspect that so these Kirtan festivals that are around, and so so the original New Vrindavan Kuli Mela, it had a Bhajan Kutir, which my guess is you probably were in there at different times, and that certainly has a massive appeal, especially to a certain age group, and you guys, you had some of your peers on, and you were all appreciating Ayendra and the many years of chanting and sacrifice that he did in Vrindavan. And that was the initial inspiration, for that Bhajan Kutir, which every Kuli Mela has the Bhajan Kutir, and it's always, it's intentionally put somewhere, in a hub, if you will. So everybody, as they're walking around, different spaces, they cross past that, and if they don't want to have anything to do with it, that's fine, and the ones who are fanatical about it, and that's all they want to do is, be in that, that circle for 3 days straight. That's great too. But the inspiration from that came, from Ayendra and the Vrndavan 24-hour Kirtan. That aspect of it, inspired enough people that, that most of those Kirtan festivals that you think of these days, as now they're all, many of them are a decade old now, and, and well established in their own space. So many of them were offshoots of Kuli Mela festivals. So the new Vrndavan 24-hour Kirtan, it happened the very next year after that first Kuli Mela, and it was the same weekend. They didn't even change weekends. They just focused in on just the Kirtan part. Radhadesh Mellows came. For Alachwa's Festival of the Holy Name, Italy's the Shravanam Kirtanam.
Yes.
And even there hasn't been a Kuli Mela in Mayapur, but them calling it the Mayapur Kirtan Mela clearly has some nods back to they got some inspiration somewhere.
That's wonderful.
So so those things have been going on, and growing. And now getting to your thing, and another piece of the offshoot of that, so like 5 years ago. Working with a good friend of mine, Muddy Das, and so he approached me 5 years ago and said, hey, I got this idea for a project. I want to do an album, a Kirtan album, but I wanted to also be a charity, so I needed to be connected with some nonprofit, and one conversation led to the next. We decided to collaborate. He put out, the Bhakti Without Borders album. We raised, $25,000, sponsored 45 girls at the Vrindavan Food for Life. So what is it? The Sandipani Muni School there.
Correct. Yeah.
And on a whim, Muddy called me one day and it's like, hey, I see, the deadline for the Grammys is, it's like 3 weeks from now, to apply. And it's, and it's a couple $100. What do you think? And we tossed it back and ha with each other for, a couple days. And then we just said, you know what, go for it. And then put it in, and then didn't just leave it and see what happened. Then we were like, okay, because part of the conversation was, if you're going to go for it, you need to commit, to trying to, actually see if you can have a chance. So we did a bunch of, behind the scenes work, trying to, he's in Hollywood, doing his thing. I live, in Los Angeles also, so you kind of know the ropes, and you start doing the dance. And then the next thing you know, we got nominated, for
fantastic.
A Grammy.
What an accomplishment! What an accomplishment! Nominated, Grammy nominated album by devotees. I'm gonna have Muddy actually on the podcast in April at some point. I spoke to him the other day through Facebook, and we're gonna do that. So.
Great, great. And definitely, I won't steal his thunder. Then knowing that he's going to come in, but I'll say that I am aware, they're cooking things up behind the scenes, and prepping to come out with round 2.
Right. Yes, he's going to come talk about that.
I'm very excited to see what he and his Bhakti Without Borders team, put together. And it is a collaboration. Again, Kulimela Association is. The institute, the organization behind it, helping be the structure behind the fundraising efforts and all of that.
Wonderful. I wanted to kind of go through some of the questions here. For our listeners, if you have any questions for Chaitanya Mangal Prabhu, please put them in the comment section. I'm going to start going through the comment section now to see if any questions are here. We have a lot of appreciation from different mutual friends here. Let's see.
Yeah, thank you, Ananda.
Yes.
Yep,
Okay, this is very nice. Bhakti Chirumar said I shouldn't take my son out of the class at Gitanarga when I took my son out of class when he made some noise. I think this was referencing your earlier interaction with Srila Prabhupada. Very nice.
Yeah. In many ways and in many places, ISKCON has evolved a lot. So it's vastly different. The experience that my generation had is not the experience that generations have now. Saying that ISKCON still has leagues to go to really be a gold standard institution, or organization that cares for its kids, but it is vastly different.
Right. This is that goes into that's a good segue into this question. What can you say about some of the practice that was happening around your time, which is still continuing in the Gurukuli system or the movement, and in your opinion needs to be reassessed? Inspiring to hear you speak. This is a good question.
Yeah. Thank you, Kirtan Premi Prabhu. I think in some ways, even if and when an institution gets to that point where they've got their child youth protections and care activities in place, it's never like, okay, now we're there, we've arrived, we don't got to worry about it. I mean, it's every single day another opportunity pops up, another possibility arises that something could go wrong, and somebody could be mistreated. I'm reminded of I think it's an African proverb, where they say that a child who doesn't feel loved will burn down the village to feel the warmth.
Oh my God.
I read that.
Wow.
Yeah, I read that a few years ago, and I went, "Wow, yeah."
Wow.
And I think we all can feel it in our own. Like that's true.
That's true.
And so so to answer Kirtan Premi's, kind of his question, it's the show that love, show the warmth, whatever that means, however you're going to do it. Because if you don't, you're going to have a generation of people who didn't feel loved, and they'll burn down the goddamn village.
How can we do that now, though? Like, okay, we made some mistakes in the past, but now how can we do that? Just to piggyback on his question.
Yeah. I mean, it's putting together, things, what attention, things grow that you give attention to. Whatever it is you focus on, that builds on itself. So what are we, I turn it back, the question to, what are we doing specifically, for kids, in which, whatever temple you're, and you're by the Tuaco temple, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So, so what's going on there, today, and what can we make sure, the kids of today are having those good experiences, and if there's nothing, then what can we do to make something happen in those spaces?
Yeah, that's always it's always a struggle to keep kids interested and inspired. I think I always think about that, because having two young children, I just think, like, there's so much outer, like, influences, and to help them, to guide them to make their own choices, it requires some type of detachment as well, that they have their own lives and they're going to make their own choices, and you have to be okay with that, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and obviously different ages, different levels of independence, but yeah, I mean, ultimately your goal is to release into the world, a fairly well-adjusted, healthy, happy, and and productive human being,
Right. Balanced, as well. Yeah.
Exactly. All of those things. You're struggling your best, to do what you can to make that happen. and we're all imperfect, and we're all going to fall short, and and it never, we're never, at least I'm not. I won't speak for everybody. I'm not going to ever, be the one that produces that next perfect human being.
Okay, we have another mutual friend here. Handling the cash back in time, petty cash, and handling it now. CFO, great one. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Vish.
Thank you for sharing your story. Hare Krishna, so good. What a story. I think when you were talking about the Mridanga, when you were at the college campus, that everyone started commenting, what a great story regarding that. Please I hope you write down your life experiences and reflections for posterity. That's definitely very important. I think you have a very unique thing to share with devotees from being from your very from your birth all the way till now, and you're in your mid 50s, about your experiences in ISKCON. Very valuable, I think.
Right. Well, yeah, and piggybacking on that a little bit, something for the last decade. So Madhava Smolan, shout out to him and all the good work that he does at ISKCON News. Between the two of us, we've collaborated on over 100 articles together.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that in some ways that is, and it's not about, I get somebody saying, my life story in particular. So it's building up histories that I, and that my focus has been on pulling out, I don't know, lost, but forgotten, and especially, realizing, that this pioneer generation, 10 years, 20 years tops, at this point, the clock's ticking down. Yeah. And if we don't get some of the key stories, from them down now, it's in some ways it's kind of now or never, we'll be. So I have been involved in writing down histories, and it is a good practice that someday, I may, turn that on, spotlight on me, and share some of my histories that way.
Very nice. Very nice. Here's from another friend of ours. One of the balance points for coolies has been how to have a sense of community across those who can't stomach ISKCON and those who still embrace it. So common ground looks loose and liberal. Comment continues. It was a key intention to really change ISKCON's impression of the coolies as well. Professional, organized, important to understand what was lost in the failed history and what could be. Very, very important. Yeah. I think this was in reference to the Kulimela Association.
Kapila was, when I didn't mention them by name, but that original group who were doing the first Kuli Mela, Kapila was part of that crew. So he definitely was instrumental, and for myself, having organized the earlier reunions, and then also being still part of these melas, one of my core philosophies or tenets, is I try to present things in a centrist perspective. In other words, bringing things as much as you can to the middle. You're not going to get we're all on a spectrum, right? And some of us are closer to something, some of us are further away from, whatever the topic is. And, and you'll get the extremes on, on any issue. But when you're trying to create a group activity, you try to find the middle space, and then you try to open that space as far as you can. And you're not going to open it up to, to accommodate everybody. Or at least I've not figured out how to do that yet, but open it as wide as it can, hold that space, invite as many people in who are comfortable coming in. And then as Kapila said, watch the interesting magic things that happen while they're in that space.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Okay, here's a question from Mohan Krishna. Do you feel the future of the next generation getting involved is in a part-time basis, or is that not feasible for a thriving movement? This is something that we wanted to talk about also regarding some of those points that I wanted to bring up at the end, but this is a good way to good question.
So you want to ask your question, so more.
I think my question was along the same lines, in the sense of what do you feel about devotees being paid for their services? Is it something that's feasible for devotees, grahastas with families, to stay in the temple and to be paid by the temple and to do temple services? I think that's a little bit along the lines of what here Mohan Krishna was talking about here.
Yeah, well, he's asking, should it be a part-time basis, or I mean, the alternative would be, is it full-time and people being paid, or something along those lines. So yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Mohan Krishna. I think for me, another thing that I've been doing, for the last decade for sure, but going earlier than that is diving deep into understanding, Prabhupada's, what we have left of Prabhupada's instructions, his books, his letters, his lectures, the transcripts and things like that, and diving deep on different topical issues. And this is certainly one of them. And I was actually surprised, and I try to do I think maybe in my younger immature days, you find the one quote you like, and then you cherry pick it, and then and you run with it,
Let's talk about that.
But I've matured way past that, and so I try to actually go in, find a time, over time. Did he say, was it a one time he said something about one thing, and that's it? Or was it something that was brought up, repeatedly over time? And you can look at either the evolution of what he said, or was he pretty darn consistent every step of the way, of what he was saying? And this is one of the ones where, I was kind of surprised, to find that he was actually fairly consistent, from the beginning, all the way till his passing. And his position was, as far as I can tell, was that, he wanted ISKCON devotees who live in the temple ashram setting. He wanted them to live very simple monk-like lives. And that's not the surprising part, right? I mean, and several places you'll find, where he says, that they should essentially have room and board, basic necessities, and some health care. But the part that was surprising to me, because we've all heard that part of it, you know what I mean? But then the next part of those same conversations, he would say, and but Prabhupada would say, I understand, most of my householder disciples are going to need more than that. So, and that's okay. And what I ask you to do for that is to live, to find an outside job, live nearby the temple, attend the programs as much as you can, and offer some service as much as you can. And at least in my era, if the 70s and 80s, I never heard, my parents never heard that. I never heard, it was, it was the first part about it, that you had to, and if you didn't live that way, then you blooped. Right. So, hearing, and Prabhupada would say, because they were asking, they said, well, there's so-and-so, and, he needs, he's going to do some of the art for you, Prabhupada, but his family needs to be maintained. So, how much should we, and he would, and he would consistently say again and again, if they want more than room and board and, and simple basic necessities, then they should, live outside. And he asked, and he would say, this is just one family. There are going to be so many families coming, and he asked, how would it be possible we maintain them all? And then a minute later, he answers his own question and says, it's not possible. So encouraging devotees, who want more than, and then there's only a very small, any religious group who are going to live, like monks and priests and, and celibate and all of that stuff. And, they're an element of most religious groups, and honoring them and having them in that special place, and then everybody else is doing their thing, to whatever levels they need to support their choice for lifestyle, and then contributes as they can, and that's how you have a functioning community, a functioning society, a functioning group. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're a great example of that, in the sense of that you took the time to, even though you were in the Gurukul, you went and got your education, got your MBA. Now you're like big on this huge company, and that's like a good example for someone to follow, in the sense of that there was some importance that you put into that. I need to be able to maintain myself in some sort of way and not rely on the temple to do that. And I think a lot of people struggle nowadays with trying to see how the movement can support them instead of trying to be independent, because I think it's important to be independent. And I think, would you say to someone who is like, I don't know, in 18, 19, that, okay, do the experiences you want, going here, going to India, doing all these things, but also put importance in education and getting some type of degree or getting some type of qualification to maintain yourself later in life?
Absolutely, yeah. I think simultaneously, those younger years when you don't have dependence and you don't have lots of life obligations, if there's a time you're going to wander around and explore things and check things out, that's absolutely the appropriate time, to be doing it. You're young, single, no dependence, go for it. At the same time, what is your longer term, because you're not gonna most likely there's a small select group of people who will remain single, unattached, unencumbered, no family, no dependence, etc. What are you doing to also address that long-term reality?
Yeah, and that was one of that was Prabhupada's advice to those people, that, okay, get an outside job, but still connect yourself with the temple and come to the programs.
Yeah, he definitely. I mean, he said, if you go outside and then disconnect yourself, what is the good? What is you? He said that several times. So you need go take care of your business, but stay close.
Right. Very important. I think that's a very fantastic point, very important point. Okay, we have some appreciation, wonderful conversation. My respects and deep gratitude to Chaitanya Mangala Prabhu for who you are and all that you have contributed to our youth and their future. All the best always. Kishore Gopal, a friend of mine, really inspired to hear from you, Prabhu. Thank you very much. Okay, I wanted to close it out, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about how do you think ISKCON can move forward in a very progressive, healthy way in regards to, I don't know in regards to what exactly, but what your focus has been from your perspective. How can ISKCON move forward?
I think in the grand scheme of societies, it's religious societies, otherwise, ISKCON's a baby. ISKCON is, it turned 50 a few years ago. It's about my age, what I mean? And, which is midlife for a human being, but it's not midlife for a society, a society that's going to have some staying power, So it's a baby. It's very young. There's lots of cultural, social, institutional, all of those things that are either slowly developing or even still just straight out missing, because it hasn't reached that, we're just now coming, to after 50 years to the point where the first group is going to, the life, what's the right word? The life, transition, but the life trajectory. We're coming out. The first group is coming to the end of stage of life trajectory.
Right.
So we've got to develop that now. You know what I mean? It's not really there. And I'm sure by the time all of that generation passes off, we'll have a lot more in place and infrastructure, and this is how we do it. Culturally, this is how ISKCON does that. So all of these things are gradually developing. Sometimes you want to drag my nails across my my eyeballs, going, oh my God, this is like watching paint dry. So painstakingly slow.
Yeah.
But then I try to take the deep breath and go, it's just gonna for these things to it's assuming that ISKCON is going to be around longer term, all of those assumptions in there, that it's just going to take time, and it's going to take falling all over themselves to reach real life experiences that translate then into meaningful. Oh, we better not do that again, and whoops, that didn't work out there. Well, that one really worked, so let's do more of that and less of the other thing.
Right. What is like your go-to devotional activity? I know, being a devotee for your whole life, practically, you just seen it all. But what is it continually that you feel connected with Krishna? What is it? What is that activity?
Yeah, I think it's serving other devotees is the core consistent in my life. I grew up in an era where japa was forced and was used as a form of punishment.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
Intense punishment. So that's not my. And even after all these years, there, I can, get triggered at times, and Kirtan is similar. Kirtan was another form of, okay, go over there in the corner, and instead of chanting japa in the corner, go sing this song for the next, hours. So there's a piece of me that doesn't find, and there's a sad part of me that I don't take as much bliss as I see, people from your age group. I mean, and watching you, it's wonderful, and I love watching you guys when you're doing it, but it doesn't have the same effect for me. And for me, one of those growth things that I had to do, going back to that, that 2006 Kuli Mela, was I had to get over myself and be like, no, these guys are having a good time, and they don't have my hangups, and I need to love and appreciate the hard work that I did so that they didn't have my experience. That's a manifestation of a positive manifestation of that sacrifice. Right. So so for me, it's in the serving, whether in ECO-Vrindaban, it's serving with the other devotees to be able to keep together an organization that cares for cows and gardens. Kuli Mela, it's serving with my peers, to facilitate others, to develop things in their local community. So it's that service is definitely my go-to.
What are your future aspirations? Like, what are your future goals? Like, your ideal, goals?
Yeah, I last year I retired, voluntarily retired as a director from both ECO-Vrindaban and ISKCON New Vrindavan. I still offer advise them on things when they'll ask me to help. So winding down those aspects of things, and a longer term consistent with me, is the child well-being in ISKCON. So exploring behind the scenes, working with some of the thankless people that are braving the waters of child protection in ISKCON, spending some time with some of them and just seeing, can I be a help and use with them, and further solidifying, what ISKCON has in place.
Very nice. Looks like one of our friends is watching. Muddy.
Hey, Muddy.
Haribo. So
Can't
we're
wait
gonna have Muddy on.
Can't wait to see your episode, Muddy.
Yes, in April. I think April. That's what I told him. But okay. Any concluding words, Chaitanya Mangala Prabhu? Thank you so much for coming on. But if you have any concluding words, I also wanted to ask you. Actually, no. Before that, I wanted to ask you another question. I always like to ask my guests who have children and who have raised children, what do you feel is the advice you can give someone like me? I have, they're both under 2, and I'd like to do the best I can for them. What, in your experience, you're much farther down the path than I am as a father. What can you share with us about raising children?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about this before the show, and just that, it's, or maybe it was during the show. I can't recall, but it's the, figuring out, that supportive, that loving and supporting space that's age appropriate. So your children are, so at this stage, there's not a lot of freedom they get to have, but there's age appropriate freedoms in there, and allowing them, and then showing them, the direction you're trying to steer them. And then, and the toughest thing, each level, there's another thing you gotta, you invested, at some point 15 years in somebody, and you get, and simultaneously, you got to invest, 5 or 10 more, and, and simultaneously you're giving up more, giving up more control each step of the way. It's a tall order, and and
giving up control is very hard. I can't imagine that. I mean, I like being in control of everything. I mean, we all do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's part of the toughest thing. And, and just recognizing that, just saying it out loud makes it a lot easier to actually do it.
That's brilliant advice. Thank you. Gosh, it's scary, but it's daunting. But I mean, you have to it's like something you got to go through it's just something you have to go through, I guess.
Yep. It's life.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just, I think maybe we're coming up towards the end here. So I was going to, finish my finishing statement here is the round 2 of my shameless plug for the late morning program. And, just appealing to everybody who's watching live today, and then ultimately more people are going to watch it, later, pre-recorded on all the amazing number of channels that you have this on. So, seek out, Namras Prabhu's fundraising, help him out. I really want to see him reach his 100th episode goal by the end of this year.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. I put it in the comments, the link. Please go ahead and donate. And if someone wants to get in contact with you, I have your email up here, chaitanya.mangala@gmail.com. If they want to get in touch with you, talk, give your appreciation to Prabhu. If you have any questions for him, I'm sure he'll love to help someone out with anything that they might have gleaned from this episode. So I appreciate it.
Facebook is there too. I'm publicly, available there. So however you can get a hold of me, I'd like to hear from people.
Very nice. Okay, well, that's episode 44. Chaitanya Mangala Prabhu, stay on. I'm going to turn off the live, but stay on a little longer. We can talk a little bit more.
See the outro?
Yeah, we're going to show you the outro. For those who don't know, I just had a new intro put in, and I have an outro as well. So check that out, and check out all the podcast is going to be up on all audio platforms as well as saved on YouTube and Facebook. Well, thank you very much, Chaitanya Mangala Prabhu. That was fascinating, and I really appreciate your outlook on things. And I just want to say personally, you're very inspiring to me as a devotee, a father, and a professional as well. I really just am inspired by your story, and I'm so glad I got to know you better by this interview.
Yeah, well, thank you. And likewise, seeing you and doing. I mean, I only know you through vicariously through your podcast, and just know that what you're doing here. This is a community service, community building. In some broader context, and it's really good. And it's the first time I watched when I knew you were onto something here, and
thank you.
wanted to be part of it. So thank you.
That means a lot. That means a lot. Thank you so much. Okay. Haribol, everyone. Talk to you later. Here's the outro.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.